with the rising sun on her wedding day, a day that was 7 years in the making, a wedding between two of the greatest people to ever live. To Rochel Imeinu, this wasn't just some guy. Yaakov Avinu was the man of her dreams, the holiest man to ever live, the ruchnius, the spiritual cosmic forces that the two of them had, would build dairos, would build generations, a future filled with children and grandchildren, shvatim, and eventually an entire nation of Bnei Yisrael from these two people. And finally, the day has arrived. The flowers have been set up. The tables and the place settings have been prepared for every guest. The guests are there. The band has begun to play. The wine has been chilled. The food is ready to be served. Everything is ready. This is Rochel's moment. She's getting the bracha from her father before she goes under the chuppah to get married. And then disaster strikes. She notices that her father is taking her sister to go get married. Her duplicitous father is exchanging the rightful bride. It is no longer to be Rochel that's going to marry Yaakov, but her sister Leah. In seconds, her hopes, her legacy, all of her dreams are crushed and torn to pieces in front of her eyes seconds before it was to happen. With a choice of a lifetime, Rochel understands good and well what's happening here. And Rashi tells us famously that Rochel Imeinu decided right here and right now to give it all up so that her sister should not be embarrassed. She went and gave over those 3 signs that they had as private symbols that Yaakov would know for sure that it's Rochel, and Rochel went over and handed them, surrendered them to her older sister Leah so that her older sister should not be pained. The koyach havitor, Rochel's giving in, giving up, is superhuman. The more we go into the story, the more eye-popping it becomes how much Rochel's self-control was, how much she gave up just so that her sister should not be embarrassed. All of the details of this story are just the tip of the iceberg for how much Rochel truly gave up. The Medrash in Ois Chav Dalet tells us that not only did Rochel just hand the signs over by telling her before the wedding, by the way, if Yaakov asks, these are the signs, but in fact, she stayed with her privately, hiding for every moment that Yaakov would say, and what did I tell you that you should say now, or ask for the sign? She fed it to her sister, Leah, say this, privately, without Yaakov seeing, sticking with her and holding her hand throughout the entire process until for sure she knew that she had done enough. And points out the great Maggid Reb Shalom Sfradron that the Dasakanim tells us that the 3 signs were actually the halachos of Shabbos, Hilchos Hadlakas Ner, and Hilchos Nida. And that Rochel found a way to teach her all of these halachos, to explain them. Maybe Leah had known them, but to make sure that she knew all of the different answers to all the halacha shailas as the simonim. Somehow Rochel found a way to do this, to guide her through the entire process. And even the halachic question that the Gemara tells us in Bav Metzia Daf Samech Beis Laman Aleph, and it becomes later brought in halacha and Orachayim Tuf Pei Beis, that Chayecha Koidmin, a person, if their life is in peril, they have to save themselves. Their own life comes first. A person is obligated to make sure he's okay. You put your mask on before you help or assist others. And Kol Shekain, the Gemara says, Al Achas Kama V'Kama, that when it comes to Ruchnius, a person needs to prioritize his ruchnius gains. So it's even a halacha. And yet still Rochel said, no, I don't want to embarrass my sister. And if this would have been Rochel's vitor, her giving in, well then dayenu. But then we find something astonishing a little bit further in the Parsha. When the famous episode with the Dudaim, it was when Reuven went out in the days of the wheat harvest, he found the Dudaim in the field and he brought them to Leah, his mother. And Rochel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's Dudaim. The Sephano comments here that the Dudaim were somewhat magical flowers. They smelled good in a way that they could help a person to conceive. And Rochel, who had been barren until this point, was asking for some Dudaim, perhaps to merit the birth of a child. And Leah's response is hard to understand. As the next pasuk says, But she said to her, quote, was your taking my husband insignificant? And now to take even my son's dudoim? What do you mean, taking my husband? What is Leah saying here? Rochel didn't take your husband. Rochel is the only reason that Leah was able to marry Yaakov. So what is Leah responding here? And the Baalei Musar tell us here something remarkable, that Rochel never exposed to Leah what she did for her. Rochel never, ever told Leah that, by the way, it was really my husband. I had done something nice for you. And after the fact mentioned to her, by the way, you know that I really was the one who was supposed to marry Yaakov and I helped you out. She never mentioned it. She would always remain silent and never expose her act of chesed that she did. To the point that Leah was able to say now, is it enough that now that you also married Yaakov, that you took my husband and now you're going to take my dudaim? So Rochel had given up her husband of her dreams, all of the ruchnius that came with that. Her legacy and her doiris had been shattered in seconds. She still never told any of this to her sister, Leah. There is something special about this act that Rochel did. Giving up, vitor, letting someone else win, protecting somebody else when you are willing to give up from yourself. Vitor, being a vatron, is today's vart. There is something odd about it and its potent powers. Just listen to this medrash. Rav Eliyahu Baruch Finkel brings it. And you can find this medrash in the introduction of the Medrash Eicha. B'sha'as shecharav Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash has been set aflame and it's being destroyed. Ba'o kol ha'avos. All of our forefathers came in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'bechia, crying lifnei Hashem. Shi'arachem al baneim. Please have mercy on your kids. Please save our Beis HaMikdash. Avraham said, please remember, Hashem, that I was willing to give up Yitzchak, give up the future of Klal Yisrael just to do your will. But to no avail. Hashem didn't listen. Yitzchak began to beseech with his claims, that he was willing to give up his life. And again, Hashem didn't listen. Yaakov began to entreat Hashem. He said, his gramidaso estrim shana bebeis lavan ve'ech shemasar atzma lamisa keshabaga be'eza bavorbanav, all of the trials and tribulations that he went through. Again, trying to convince Hashem to save the Beis HaMikdash and not let it be destroyed. And then came Moshe Rabbeinu, and he began to stake his claim as to why Hashem should save the Beis HaMikdash. And again, Hashem did not listen. And then ba'osai sha'a kavtza Rochel Imeinu got up lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu veheskira, and she reminded Hashem about the Maisa Misiras HaSimonim LeLeah, that she gave over the signs to Leah Kedei in order shalotete lecherpa, so that her sister should not be embarrassed. So she said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please do not send your children out and destroy the Beis HaMikdash so that we should not be embarrassed. And what happened next? Miyad, immediately, nisgalgalu rachamav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem had mercy and compassion. V'omar b'shvil Rochel, because of you, Rochel, ani machazir es Yisrael l'mekaymam. I'm going to save the Beis HaMikdash. What a medrash plea. The greatest legends of our Torah have got up to Hashem with their ultimate righteous deeds, and yet none of it worked until Rochel came with this story. Something's different about giving in, giving up, being mevater. And even in modern times, a story like this literally has happened, where someone's giving in, giving up has saved the Jewish people. As heard from Rabbi Yehuda Geberer, it was the 6-day war, and the Mir Yeshiva was kind of in a tough spot. The yeshiva is kind of in no man's land in between, where the Jordanian army was attacking, and they were shooting shells into Yerushalayim. It was well known that the Mir Yeshiva had a miklat, had a bomb shelter, so all of the neighbors around had crowded into the bomb shelter in the bottom of the Mir Yeshiva. while 6,000 shells were being fired into Yerushalayim. The scene down there was men, women, and children huddled together with their families, crying, saying Tehillim. In one corner, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, the Rosh Yeshiva, was leading a group of saying Tehillim. He was giving intermittent drushos, giving chizuk. In another corner, Reb Nachum Partzovitz, his son-in-law, was learning still Bahas trying to save the Jewish people. And then all of a sudden, a direct hit into the building, and the entire Mir Yeshiva is shaking, and their lives are hanging in the balance, crying and shrieking, scared that the building about to collapse on top of them, when all of a sudden, one of the women, one of the neighbors who had been left in Aguna, whose husband had left her without a get, who had been stuck, unable to get remarried, screamed out, and she said, Hashem, I forgive my husband. Please forgive your children. And the building stopped shaking. The shells stopped being fired. And Reb Chaim Shmulevitz declared that because of this woman was the Mir Yeshiva and all those people saved. There's something different about giving up, giving in, being mevater. What the Dvar is, what the pshat is, I'm not entirely sure. But what we do see is that it is one of the most potent powers we have. You never lose, we see, by giving in and giving up. How much did Rochel gain? How many thousands of people did she save? Even in modern times, this tactic has been used to build and to gain with this simple act of giving up, being mevater, giving in and being moichel. We should be misoirer. We should be inspired when we hear these stories. Who doesn't have a person that they don't see eye to eye with, or a matter in their life that they just can't seem to get over? Let this be a sign. Let this be an inspiration. Give in, give up, be mevater. Hear these stories, understand the greatness, understand the power of how special it is to Hashem. Give up, give in, be mevater. Because giving up, giving in is actually a formula for success.